have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am that Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. I hope everyone's doing well today. We're halfway through the week. That's got to feel good, I guess. I don't know. It's Wednesday. We've got some interesting tidbits to cover today. Some very interesting apartment vacancy rate information that I think might be indicating we're at an interesting point. We're always looking for those pivot points. Is this one of them? We'll talk about that in a minute. Before we jump in, though, let's remind everyone how to get in touch. The best way is through the website. Head on over to therebelbroker.com. From there, you can click on Contact button in the menu bar, which is where it always is. Feel free to send along any ideas, suggestions, observations, questions, whatever is bouncing around in your well-appointed brain case. Feel free to send it along. While you're there, why not get yourself in the running for a $50 Amazon gift card? Now, we've been doing this for a while. We've given out, I don't know, I lose count. I try to gently increment the amount. It's somewhere between $550 and $650 so far. We've already given out the $50 gift card for September, but of course we're creeping up on the end of September now, so we'll be doing it again in October. And in order to get your name in the hat, all you have to do is visit therebelbroker.com, click the big red button at the top of the page titled Take the Survey to Support the Show. And yes, you are helping the show, but you're also putting your name into the hat for that $50 gift card. So go ahead, use an email address that you will respond to within 24 hours, because that's how you're going to win the money. But before you win the money, I'll actually verify that there's a human on the other end of that email address. So if I don't hear back from you within 48 hours, I move on to another winner. So don't let that happen to you, because that would stink. Answer the handful of questions, and you're helping me, and then you're entered. And the next thing you know, you just might win yourself 50 Amazon bucks. So do head on over, take advantage of that opportunity. I wish you luck, and congratulations to all the folks who have won already. Okay, so this is coming to us from Calculated Risk, but they're really just reporting information that was published by Reis, I think is how you say that. And it's an interesting change because it plays into a lot of the data that we've talked about. Now, it's kind of a refresher. We've talked a lot about the type of construction that's been going on now for a couple of years. And it has been tons and tons of multifamily apartment buildings, more or less. I've talked about the gigantic campus of apartments that was built in South San Jose, just off of the 85 freeway. It's gigantic. My guess is that eventually those will be not as desirable because they're crammed in there like sardines. There's a huge apartment complex being built in Gilroy, which for my money kind of outstrips the demand in that area, but we'll see how that goes. And then there's several others along the 101 freeway, which is one of the freeways that kind of really goes up to the heart of Silicon Valley. Some folks would argue with me on that one. There's a number of freeways, but the 101 is one of the main ones. Lots of apartments there. More apartments being built in Mountain View and all over. So a lot of construction. And I'm sure that in your area, for those of you who live in some of the more metro areas, that's what you've been seeing as well. At least if the average statistics that we cover here on the show have any validity, that's the trend, right? But not enough single family residential, tons and tons of multifamily or apartment style. All right. If you flash forward, and this is one reason why I sort of keeping track of this stuff is important. One of the things we said to look out for would be an increase in apartment vacancy rates, an increase in competition between those types of providers of residences, and potentially a reduction in rents in those units eventually, because that's what has to happen, right? If the only beast you feed in this real estate cage match is multifamily apartment style living, well, eventually you're going to hit a saturation point. So the question to ask is, are we kind of there? According to this report, apartment vacancy rates were at 4.5% in the third quarter of 2017, up from 4.4% in the second quarter, and up from 4.1% in the third quarter of 2016. So we've basically seen a 0.4% increase, almost a 0.5% increase in vacancies over the course of 1 year. Now, is that earth-shattering? No, but it's also important to understand how sensitive these businesses can be to relatively small changes in vacancy rate. Now, the vacancy rate peaked at 8% at the end of 2009. So these folks are going to be much more sensitive to these kinds of things, particularly since they have so many units. It'll be interesting to see what this ends up equaling as we move further into this marketplace. Once we get units completed, now I'm not sure what the local numbers are, to be honest. This is obviously numbers coming for the country on average, but it was going to be very interesting to get this sort of data for the area that I'm in, because we need to understand what effects this kind of stuff has on the renting public in general, if those are your customers. If you are someone who owns a multifamily unit, maybe it's a duplex, maybe it's a quad, maybe it's 5 or more units. If you have a single family residential home, you need to understand your relationship to that part of the marketplace, right? Because typically your renters, the folks who come to rent that single family residential home of yours, are folks who are coming from an apartment scenario and don't want it anymore, right? That tends to be a pretty dominant representation in terms of the folks who want to rent your property. All right, so let's go ahead and actually take the statement from this report from REIS. Quote, the apartment market continued to withstand the pressure from added supply in the third quarter as the national vacancy rate increased only 10 basis points to 4.5% in the latest quarter. With so much construction underway, vacancy rates are thought to grow higher. More importantly, asking rents increased 1% in the third quarter, while effective rents grew 0.9%. That's interesting to note, that despite the fact we actually saw an increase in vacancies, we saw an increase at the same time in the amount they were charging. Let's see. Total inventory is still expected to increase significantly in 2017 and 2018. However, construction in the third quarter, 47,271 units, was again lower than expected. That said, this number should be revised once things are settled in Florida and Houston, two areas that have seen significant construction this year. At 4.5%, the national vacancy rate increased 10 basis points from 4.4 in the second quarter. And we already talked about the shift in those numbers. All right, so we've kind of laid the ground here of what numbers have changed. Now the important thing to think about is, depending on where you sit on the range of investment options as a person out there, or as someone who's looking to rent, right? What can this potentially mean for you in terms of real market occurrences? We're going to go ahead and take a look at that in just a second, but we're going to take a quick break before we do, so don't go away. We'll be right back. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner-broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We are talking about some interesting new numbers relating to the vacancy rate of apartments. I like looking at data for apartments. I think that data for apartments gives you a little bit of an insight into what folks are thinking. It gives you some, and we can clearly understand why certain changes are happening relating to vacancy rate now, simply because we know what's been getting built, right? It's not a hard, mind-bending process. I mean, we're not trying to find the area under the curve here. We're just trying to figure out the why behind it, to see if we can't find a link between the whys that are causing that and any decisions we might want to make in our real estate decisions. But even more significantly is, what might we see? What expectations might we set for our real estate markets based on this data? Okay, so let's talk about a couple of scenarios here. Now, the first scenario for me would be availability. In my local area, I have been very tuned in for the last couple of months to rentals that are available, and how quickly they go off the market, and how many, not as much tuned into, are there multiple people trying to apply to rent these homes, but how quickly they tend to disappear from availability. Now, the reason I've been doing that is because of one of my plans that I'm working on in terms of selling the home I'm currently living in and then renting for a period of time, as I then invest the proceeds from that sale and potentially wait for the market to shift more to buyers so that I can take advantage of that when the time comes. So there's that. And that's, for those of you who've been listening for a while, you know that plan has gone through several variations. It's had a plan B and a plan C. It has had moments where things seem to be going great, and it's had moments where things weren't going so great. So there's going to be an update on that come the end of the year. I want to do a lessons learned show where we talk about all of that stuff, because I've got tons of them for this year. But in any event, I've been keeping plugged into that. And I think that a lower level of occupancy, meaning higher vacancy rates, is interesting because it makes the availability higher. It means that there are going to be more homes available, as things are right now, for folks who are willing to put themselves into an apartment renting scenario. What else is interesting about that is more are coming. Now, as this article discusses, we're not just going to see more in 2017. I see a couple that look like they're going to be ready to open before the end of this year. I see tons more that look like they're going to be opening in the first or second quarter of next year. So there's a lot more stuff coming online. Now, if you consider all of the other influences, we've talked a lot about how, at least in my area, there are an awful lot of folks who live here who say they don't want to live here. The last numbers we threw around were north of 60% looking to jump ship in terms of leaving not just the Bay Area, but California in general. And so it makes it an interesting thing to consider based on how much volatility might we see just in the market in terms of numbers of folks looking to rent or to buy in the marketplace. I bring this subject up with a lot of folks, former clients, current clients that are in the industries most influential here in the Bay Area, which tend to be high tech jobs, and they're totally open to going somewhere else, but they just don't see a lot of opportunities to do that. And a lot of them don't do the math in their head in terms of understanding the costs of living here versus what they get paid. They tend to focus just on what they get paid here, which tends to be a whole lot more than everywhere else. But at the end of the month, if you were to take the pay that you would get in some other market where there is high tech, you tend to discover that at the end of each month, you'd actually have more money in your pocket. I actually just helped a client who was looking at the possibility of selling the home they currently live in and relocating, but they didn't think the cash flow would work for them. So we ran some numbers, and it looked like where they would be going, they would absolutely have much better cash flow. They'd be making somewhere in the neighborhood of 15% less. But once you took into account the tax policies in the new location and the lower cost of living in the new location, it ended up making a whole lot of sense. So, just a side note. I mean, I realize this isn't probably unless you're a real estate person, this probably isn't a conversation you're going to have with someone, but perhaps it's something that you in your own life, if you're looking to figure out what you want to do next, maybe that's a conversation you need to have with yourself and try to get realistic numbers that reflect what would occur in your income profile in a new location. So just to throw that out there, because this person was floored, and this was a smart guy. This is a computer science guy, and good with numbers and all that other wonderful stuff, but really hadn't ever gone to the trouble of really plugging everything in and figuring it out. So take that into consideration. All right. So given that, and given the fact that we're going to see more come online, I think that the availability of an apartment is going to increase. The ability to get one is going to increase. And despite the fact that we also saw an increase in rent, I'm not so sure that that becomes something that can be sustainable. If we continue to see reductions in the occupancy, if we see fewer people in these apartments, at some point the math has got to give, and these folks have to realize they're competing with other apartment complexes, and they need to reduce their prices. The reason why I'm interested in that number is because what is the sweet spot for this number? What is the point at which folks who are out there looking for a residence to rent are going to be willing to rent an apartment instead of a single-family residential home because of the savings in terms of that rent? Now, I realize this is a difficult one to get your finger on. If you're someone who lives in my area, this is something that's probably quite a ways out there. But it's something to consider. It's something to consider if you currently own rental properties. You need to get a better handle on what this interesting profile is for your community. What's happening with apartment complexes? Is it a similar scenario? Does your local area tend to be represented by these same numbers that we're seeing across the country? Because if they are, it's, I think, in your best interest to do what we've talked about before whenever numbers like this come along that tend to change the landscape of your customer base. And that is, do I have enough elbow room on my current rents? Am I positive cash flow enough that if I needed to compete in a marketplace, could I reduce my rents by X% in order to accommodate that and continue to keep my property rented as much as possible? So that's number one. Number two is simply recognizing that as a owner of a property that you're renting, and it absolutely applies to single family residential folks, because you're offering a different way of living. I mean, everyone who's lived in an apartment knows that apartment living by and large stinks. Now, an exception to that, when I was driving my son up to Seattle for college, and we stopped off in Portland, I saw some beautiful buildings that looked like they're going to be apartment buildings that were built as if they were going to be really attractive condos, which had me wondering if they didn't have the same rule that Seattle does or Redmond does that makes it difficult for investors to build condos right off the bat and instead end up building buildings that will become condos but stay apartments for some period of time ahead of time. Because there's a way of life thing that you're offering as a single family residential owner who's renting than the rental experience. That could even be true of a duplex to one degree or another. You're just sharing one wall. But it's the importance of understanding that when this potential competition ramps up a little bit, your first move may not need to be to adjust your costs or what you're charging for rent. Your marketing can really make a difference. You would want to, like, for instance, in my case, I would do direct mails to people in apartment complexes. Now, you may not be able to compete. Some folks may simply be thinking numbers in their head if they're out there looking for a place right now. But for folks that are doing that search and they're in an apartment or they've done a lot of apartment living, they know the downsides. Particularly for places that don't have all the little things that annoyed the hell out of you when you lived in an apartment. Not having laundry services within the apartment unit. You had to go downstairs or you had to go to the laundromat. In many areas, that's not much of a big deal anymore. One of the first things most new investors do when they purchase an apartment building of 5 units or more is to figure out a way to get laundry services within each unit, simply because that increases its desirability dramatically. But you can find these places still and market directly to them, just to let folks know that for a modest increase of your rent of this amount, you could get yourself into a single family residential home or into a duplex or into a quad as long as you're still pitching the lifestyle. So develop that. In addition to kind of trying to build in more elbow room into your cash flow, another option is to understand that you can overcome some of these shortcomings with marketing. And it means you also need to be very aware of the intent of your current tenants. If you know your tenants are considering leaving, that's a two-pronged decision-making process. Prong number one is, good, I've had trouble with these tenants. They've been late. I'll be happy to get better renters. And the other is, and that may give you an opportunity to make an improvement in the unit. It may give you an opportunity to get yourself a better tenant. But if you have a good tenant, you should absolutely consider your options. Now, obviously, marketing isn't going to do it, but if you can figure out what it is they really want, try to get that for them. And if it really does come down to a lower rent, and the reason they want to move out is because they are having cash flow issues and they want to move into an apartment complex, once you've established that those cash flow issues aren't things that will make things harder for you. I mean, it may be that something has changed on the part of your tenant and they're simply trying to be responsible. Maybe someone has lost a job, who knows what has happened. But if these folks are simply being responsible with the way they're managing their money and they simply know they cannot afford your unit anymore, that's one thing. If these are folks who are simply trying to just improve their cash flow, they're not going to get a big hit to their monthly income. They just want to bank more money. That is an opportunity for you to keep a very good renter, but you know they're a good renter because you've been renting to them for X amount of time, to make an adjustment and hold on to them and keep them in the unit. Now, of course, that's a strategy you're going to want to use if you have been keeping abreast of what the market's doing enough to know that you would have a hard time finding someone as good as that renter to replace someone who's leaving. Now, another aspect to this that I think is interesting for folks to consider is, what does this mean in general for the single family residential scene? Let's say, now that we've talked a little bit about what investors should be thinking, and to further the investor thinking, that's one way if you're currently a holder. But one other way to think about this is, given the dynamic of increased competition from apartment complexes, you as an investor need to start thinking, what do I do about my investment strategy that differentiates me and guarantees me, or at least gives me the highest probability of providing a housing product that will be profitable for me? Maybe in a saturated apartment complex world, the best buy isn't that 50-unit apartment complex, or at least not that 50-unit apartment complex doing math that assumes you can get the same rents moving forward as they're getting now. Maybe you need to budget for a more challenging environment where there's more competition from other apartment complexes. However, if you are thinking about investing, let's say you've always done apartments and you've actually looked around in your marketplace and you've seen tons of new apartment complexes breaking ground and looking like they're going to be rolling out very, very soon, maybe it's time for you to consider liquidating that at a high, being able to show amazing numbers, and then turn that around and invest it into properties that will satisfy a need that is less represented. The need that is being represented the most in construction today is apartment living. Even if you're doing a duplex or a quad that at least provides something that feels more like a single family home or a townhome or something along those lines, your desirability is improved. So it's all about having a product that gives you the highest probability of getting the income that you need, given the pool of potential customers that you have. And so my argument is the supply of apartments is going to continue to go up dramatically over the next year. And you as a property investor or a current owner should really take advantage of that, should understand that and assess your current holdings and decide whether or not you're at a peak. I think there's a good chance that folks who own apartment complexes are at a peak. And that may not matter to you. For you, it may have nothing to do, you may not care about anything else, simply because your cash flow is good. Maybe you have enough elbow room, maybe enough headroom on your positive cash flow that it doesn't worry you at all, that you are sitting pretty. Great. Hold on to that. Ride the wave. I see no problem with that. But if not, if a challenge would scare you, if something in the marketplace that would force you to consider reducing rents would be a big problem for you, it may be a time for you to consider whether or not a new decision needs to be made. Okay, so for those of you that are out there renting, it's an opportunity for you to decide if you want to use the circumstances of the rental marketplace to your best advantage. Now, things I've talked about, if you're a renter, if you're someone who is currently renting an apartment and you want out, it makes it more difficult for you. If you're someone who wants to buy, one of the things I've always suggested is that you use the lease option. I don't want to turn this into a lease option show with only a few minutes left. You might want to go ahead and go to therebelbroker.com, do a search on lease option. I've done several shows on lease options. I think I did one show dedicated entirely to lease options, and I've had several guests on the show who are big fans of lease options. So consider that. It's basically a way for you to agree to purchase a home in the future that you're renting while you're renting it. And there's great ways you can orchestrate that. But this is also an opportunity when things are changing for you to potentially use that information for you to make a better deal in the marketplace that you're working in. Now, it makes it a little bit more difficult for you. This would be better if these dynamics were working more on single-family residentials. But if you are seeing this happening, if you're renting a home and you are seeing tons of apartments coming online and you think that this could represent a challenge to the rent that your owner of this property is currently making, simply because it'll be a more competitive marketplace, this means a good opportunity for you to approach that seller and talk about buying the property from them. It could be a lease option. It could be a straight up purchase, however you want to do it. But by pointing out the stresses in the marketplace and what that might mean for the overall market, you potentially are putting yourself in a position to do a awesome purchase, because that would be an insider purchase. There's no MLS. There's no competition with other people. This is someone who's worked with you for a very long time. You've been their tenant, and they may see the writing on the wall as well, particularly if you are the person that informs them of that, gives them the data on what's happening. Maybe it's an opportunity for you to take that and run with it and get yourself into a property. All right. I do appreciate y'all taking the time to listen to what I have to say on these subjects. I hope, as I always do, that I've left far more valuable information on the table for you than the time you've chosen to invest with me. But thanks for doing it. I truly appreciate it. I'll talk to y'all next time.